Vivian Scott pressed the needle through fabric with hands that hadn't stopped shaking since Philadelphia, and she didn't look up when the cowboy told her she was trespassing on his grief. She already knew. If this story about a broken woman and a man too proud to ask for help moves something in your chest, subscribe to our channel and follow every part to the very end. Drop a comment below. What city are you watching from? I want to see how far this story travels. The stagecoach didn't so much stop in Harlan Creek as it surrendered to it. One wheel hit a rut deep enough to swallow a boot. The whole coach lurched sideways, and Vivian Scott grabbed the leather strap above the window with both hands, her knuckles white, her jaw tight, her composure the only thing she refused to lose. She had already lost enough. The driver's voice came rough through the heat. "End of the line, folks. Harlan Creek, Wyoming. God help you." Nobody laughed. Nobody disagreed. Vivian was the last one off. She stepped down onto sun-cracked earth, her traveling bag in one hand, and nothing else, and she stood still for a moment in the July furnace and looked at the town that would either save her or finish the job Philadelphia had started. It wasn't much to look at. One main road of packed dirt. A saloon with a broken shutter banging in the dry wind. A general store. A church that leaned slightly left, as if it were reconsidering its purpose. 24 people who had all stopped what they were doing to stare at her. She stared back. She had learned that in the last year, the art of not flinching. "You the new schoolteacher?" The voice belonged to a woman standing on the porch of the general store. She was broad-shouldered and sharp-eyed, wearing a flour-dusted apron and an expression that didn't yet know what it thought of Vivian. "That's right," Vivian said. "Vivian Scott, from Philadelphia." "Philadelphia?" The woman said it the way people say a foreign country. "Long way to come for a schoolhouse with a leaky roof." "I wasn't given the impression that it leaked." "Well, now you have been." A few of the watchers smiled at that. Not unkindly. Just the way a town smiles when it's sizing something up and hasn't decided yet. The woman introduced herself as Ruth Calloway, postmistress, and apparently the closest thing Harlan Creek had to a welcoming committee. She walked Vivian to the small room behind the schoolhouse that would serve as her quarters, pointed out the well, the outhouse, the woodpile, and the three things in town that Vivian should absolutely not touch, borrow, or look at sideways. One of them was the Crawford Ranch. "That's the spread 3 miles east," Ruth said, nodding toward the flat open land beyond the edge of town. "Mason Crawford owns it. He's well. He keeps to himself. You keep to yourself about him. That's the arrangement that works." "What arrangement is that?" Ruth looked at her for a moment. "The kind where nobody gets hurt." Vivian wanted to ask more. She didn't. She'd learned that too, when to wait. She spent her first 3 days in Harlan Creek, unpacking, cleaning the schoolhouse, and meeting the families who would eventually trust her with their children. Most of the parents were cautious. A few were warm. One woman, Margaret Hale, the blacksmith's wife, brought her a jar of peach preserves and sat with her for an hour on the schoolhouse steps, talking about nothing important and everything necessary. "You running from something?" Margaret asked, not unkindly near the end of that hour. Vivian looked out at the dry summer hills. "Isn't everyone who comes here?" Margaret smiled. "Fair enough." What Vivian didn't say, what she had not said to anyone, not even to herself, in the clearest possible terms, was that she had come to Wyoming because the alternative was becoming the woman Philadelphia expected her to be. The woman who smiled through humiliation. The woman who kept quiet when her fiancé stood before their entire social circle and announced with great regret and tremendous manufactured sorrow that Vivian Scott had suffered a nervous episode and was no longer fit for marriage or society. He had said it at a dinner party. Over soup. While she was sitting right there, and every person at that table. People she had known for 20 years had looked at her the way you look at something fragile that is already broken, and not one of them had said a word. She had set her spoon down, very quietly, stood up, walked out of the house, and not gone back. 3 months later, she was in Wyoming. She was not running. She was arriving. There was a difference, and it mattered, even if only to her. "Yeah," She found Mason Crawford by accident on the fourth day. She had gone further east than she meant to, following a faint track through the scrub brush because she had seen what looked like wild lavender on a hillside and wanted it for the schoolroom. And she'd crested a small rise and looked down into a shallow hollow, and there he was. He was sitting on a fence post, not leaning against it, not standing near it, sitting on it the way a man sits when he thinks no one can see him, and he has given up on appearances. His hat was pushed back on his head, his shirt was off, and he was holding it in his lap with both hands staring at it. For a moment, Vivian thought he was injured. She scrambled down the rise without thinking the slope was steeper than it looked, and she half-slid the last few feet, arriving at the bottom with considerably less dignity than she'd intended, and she saw as she got closer that he wasn't bleeding. He was trying to sew. The shirt had a tear along one side seam, long and ragged, the kind of damage done by a nail or a hard fall. He had a needle threaded God only knew how. His hands were the hands of a man who worked cattle and fences and heavy things, not silk and thread, and he was attempting to bring the torn edges together. His hands were shaking. Not from effort. She could see that. It wasn't effort making them shake. "Here," she said. He looked up. She had expected weathered and hard. She had not expected the eyes. They were the gray of a sky about to break weather, deep-set and exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with last night's sleep. "This is private land, ma'am." "I can see that," she said. "Your hands are shaking." "They're not." "They are." She held out her own hand, palm up. "Give me the needle." He stared at her. "I don't know you." "No, but I know how to sew, and you clearly don't, and that tear will only get worse if you keep pulling at it. Give me the needle." Something moved through his expression. Not anger exactly, not surprise, something harder to name. He looked at her hand for a long moment, then at the ruined seam in his shirt, then back at her. He gave her the needle. She sat down on a rock nearby, without being invited, took the shirt across her lap and began to work. She was good at this. Her mother had insisted on it, one of those relics of a proper Philadelphia upbringing that had turned out to be actually useful in the real world. "You must always know how to do practical things, Vivian, because the world does not care about your piano scales when your hem is falling." She kept her stitches small, and even the way she'd been taught, and she didn't look up. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then, Mason Crawford, Vivian Scott. A beat. The new schoolteacher. "I know who you are." "Does the whole town talk about me?" "Only the parts that don't have anything better to talk about." He paused. "Which is most of it." She almost smiled. She kept her eyes on the stitching. "They told me to stay away from your ranch." Good advice. And yet. He agreed, and there was something in his voice she couldn't quite read. Not warmth, not quite, but not nothing. She finished the first section of the seam. The shirt wasn't pretty, but it would hold. "Why were your hands shaking?" The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. You always ask questions like that to people you just met. "I used to not ask questions at all," she said. "I've been reconsidering that policy." He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked away toward the hills. "It's the anniversary of something," he said finally. "Some days it comes back in the hands first." She didn't push. She went back to stitching. "Anniversary of what?" she asked maybe 2 minutes later, not pushing, just asking. The way you ask when you actually want to know, not when you're filling silence. "My wife," he said. "She died 3 years ago today, July the 10th. Vivian's hands stilled for just a moment, then resumed. "I'm sorry," she said. Not the Philadelphia version of sorry, which meant, "How dreadful, do change the subject." The real version. "I'm truly sorry." She was good, he said, and that was all he said about it. But the way he said it, 2 words that carried about 10 years of everything, told Vivian more than a speech would have. She tied off the thread and broke it, handed the shirt back. He looked at the seam, ran his thumb along it. "That's better work than I could have paid for." "I know." That surprised him into a short sound, not quite a laugh, but the cousin of one. "You don't have a lot of false modesty, Miss Scott. I had too much of it for too long," she said, standing and brushing dust from her skirt. "I'm trying to quit." He stood too reflexively, a gesture so automatic she suspected he wasn't even aware of it. The kind of manners that get put into a person young and don't come out. He pulled the repaired shirt on and buttoned it. "You should head back before the afternoon heat sets in," he said. "The creek track is better than the ridge in July. I came over the ridge. I know. I watched you slide down it." She felt heat in her face that had nothing to do with the sun. "That was not my finest moment." "You didn't stop," he said. Most people would have turned around. She looked at him. He was looking at the middle distance again, at the hills, at something she couldn't see. "I don't turn around much anymore," she said. He nodded once slowly, like something had been confirmed. She took the creek track back. She didn't think about Mason Crawford the rest of that afternoon. She thought about the schoolroom and the list of students she'd been given, and whether the leaking roof could be patched before September. She thought about the peach preserves Margaret had given her, and whether she should use them tonight or save them. She thought about the way a man's hands can shake on a July afternoon 3 years after a loss, and how he hadn't hidden it from her, hadn't explained it away, just named it and let it sit. She thought about that more than she'd intended. The first day of school came with a sky so blue it looked painted. 14 children filed into the schoolhouse in various states of cleanliness and enthusiasm, ranging from a 6-year-old girl named Bessie, who had brought Vivian a slightly wilted dandelion and a gap-toothed smile, to a 15-year-old boy named Cole Hargis, who sat in the back row with the calculated insolence of someone who'd decided to be trouble before he even walked through the door. "We had a teacher last year," Cole announced during her introduction. "He left after 2 months." "Good for him," Vivian said pleasantly. "He made room for me." A few children laughed. Cole looked startled. "We don't do much reading here," he continued. "Most of us got ranches to get back to." "Then I'll teach you to read faster," Vivian said. "Sit down, please." He sat down. She had a feeling about Cole Hargis. The feeling she always got about children who came in swinging, as if challenging the teacher was a test they needed to pass before they could let themselves learn anything. She'd seen it in Philadelphia. She saw it here. Different dirt, same need. She taught them letters and numbers and a little geography. And at the end of the first day, Bessie ran back in after being dismissed to give Vivian another dandelion. This one had been carried so carefully that it was slightly less wilted than the first. "This one's better," Bessie said earnestly. "It's perfect," Vivian told her, and meant it. It was Ruth Calloway who told her about the Hargis situation. 3 weeks into the school year, the heat still searing, the days still long. Ruth came by the schoolhouse after hours with that expression Vivian was learning to recognize, the one that meant, "I'm going to tell you something because you need to know it, not because it's any of my business." "Cole's father," Ruth said, settling onto the bench near the window, "is Garrett Hargis. He runs cattle on the South Range. He and Mason Crawford have been fighting over water rights for 2 years. The creek. 1 creek, 2 ranches, and a legal agreement that both men interpret differently." Ruth folded her hands. "It was manageable until this spring. Now there are 3 of Hargis's men camped on the south bank, and 2 of Mason's near the mill, and the territorial marshal is a 3-day ride away." Vivian was quiet for a moment. "And Cole Hargis is in my school, as is Tommy Briggs, who works for Mason's ranch and whose father would walk through fire for that man." Ruth paused. "They sit 6 feet apart, every day." "I noticed." "I thought you might." Ruth stood. "I'm not telling you to get involved. I'm telling you so you understand what you're standing in the middle of, whether you ask to be or not." Vivian looked at her. "Does anyone in this town ask to be in the middle of anything?" Ruth gave her a long look. "No, Miss Scott. That's rather the point." She went back to the Crawford ranch the next Saturday, not to return anything. Not because she had a reason she could have explained to Ruth or Margaret or anyone else. She went because she had been thinking about a man whose hands shook on anniversaries, and because she had always believed, even through the Philadelphia years, that some things deserve more than one visit. He was working the fence line when she arrived. He saw her coming from a distance. She was on the road this time. No undignified ridge sliding, and he stopped what he was doing and waited. "Miss Scott?" "Mr. Crawford." She stopped a few feet away. "I hear you have a water problem." His expression shifted. Just slightly, the way weather shifts. The way a sky goes from merely overcast to something with intention. "Who told you that?" "It's a small town." "It is," he said. "And your job is teaching children, not—" "Cole Hargis hasn't turned in an assignment in 3 weeks," she said. "He sits in my schoolroom every day with his jaw set and his eyes on Tommy Briggs, and he's learning absolutely nothing because he's too busy being his father's soldier. And Tommy Briggs is doing the same thing from the other side." She looked at him steadily. "So yes, Mr. Crawford, this is my problem." He looked at her for a long time. Then he said, "You want coffee?" It wasn't a gracious invitation. It was a concession. But she recognized the difference between a door that is locked and a door that simply needs to be pushed. "Yes," she said. "I do." They sat on the porch of the ranch house with 2 tin cups and the long golden light of a Wyoming afternoon, and he told her in the spare factual way he told things as if he were reciting an inventory about the water agreement, the dry year, the 3 months of letters that had gotten nowhere, and the morning 2 weeks ago when he had walked down to the creek at dawn and found Hargis's fence posts driven 20 feet into his water access. "What did you do?" she asked. "Went home," he said. "Had coffee. Didn't pull the posts." "Why not?" "Because that's how it starts." He looked out at his land. "I've seen how it starts. It starts with fence posts, and it ends with something I don't want to be part of." Vivian looked at him. "You know the law is on your side." "I know what's written," he said. "The territorial marshal is 3 days away, and Garrett Hargis has 4 armed men and a history of not caring much about what's written." She was quiet. "And I have a ranch to run," he said, "and a sister in Santa Fe who expects me to still be alive in October." He looked at his hands. "And some days, that's about as much reason as I can work with." Vivian looked at those hands, steadier today than they had been the first time she saw them, but not easy. Never quite easy. "That's enough reason," she said. "That's plenty." He looked at her. Not the quick glance he gave things he'd already assessed. The other kind. "You're an unusual woman, Miss Scott." "I've been told," she said, usually as an insult. "Not here," he said, and looked away again, back to his land, before she could decide what to do with that. She rode home in the cooling evening with the taste of tin cup coffee on her tongue, and the sense, faint but undeniable, like the smell of rain before the clouds arrived, that she had walked through some kind of door. She didn't know yet what was on the other side. But she had stopped turning back from doors, and the summer was long, and the land was wide, and Mason Crawford's hands had been steady when he handed her the coffee cup, and Vivian Scott had learned the hard way not to dismiss small things. Small things were where everything started. The coffee visits became a habit before either of them named it. Every Saturday, Vivian rode the creek track east. Every Saturday, Mason had 2 cups ready by the time she reached the porch. Neither of them discussed it. Neither of them suggested stopping. It simply continued the way rivers continue, not because anyone decides they should, but because the land tilts that way and the water follows. The town noticed inside of 2 weeks. Ruth Calloway said nothing directly. She simply started asking Vivian what time she planned to be back on Saturday afternoons in a tone that suggested she was asking something else entirely. Margaret Hale was warmer about it. She squeezed Vivian's arm one morning and said, "Good," with a decisiveness that required no further explanation. The others ranged from quietly curious to openly suspicious, and Vivian was learning to tell the difference between the two, which in Harlan Creek was a survival skill. It was Doris Pratt who said it to her face. Doris ran the boarding house and had opinions about everything delivered with the particular confidence of someone who has never once been told to stop. She caught Vivian outside the general store on a Tuesday afternoon and cut straight to it. "People are talking about you and Crawford." "Are they?" Vivian said. Not a question. "You ought to be careful. Man like that has a reputation." "What kind of reputation?" Doris pursed her lips. "He doesn't let people in. And the ones who try end up—" She waved a hand vaguely, hurt. "Or gone." Vivian looked at her. "Mrs. Pratt, I have coffee with a neighbor on Saturday mornings. I'm not proposing marriage." "Not yet," Doris said with an arch of her brow that implied she knew things Vivian didn't. Vivian picked up her supplies and walked away. But the word stayed with her yet longer than she would have liked. She didn't mention it to Mason that Saturday. She almost did twice. But something in the way he sat that morning, tighter than usual, his jaw carrying something heavy, made her wait. "Hargis pulled the mill access," he said before she could say anything at all. She went still. "The mill on your property. He's claiming the access road crosses his survey line." "It doesn't. But he's got a man standing on it with a rifle and a lot of patience. And until I can get a surveyor out here, which is a 6-week wait minimum, there's nothing I can do except go around." He set his cup down. "Going around costs me 4 hours a day." 4 hours? Every day. He looked at his hands. In August. She understood what that meant. August in Wyoming was not a month that gave back 4 hours easily. August was the month that decided whether the fall and winter would be survived or merely endured. "Have you talked to anyone in town? The mayor or—" "Harlan Creek doesn't have a mayor." A pause. "It has Doris Pratt and 3 men who do whatever keeps her quiet, which is not the same thing." Despite everything, Vivian almost laughed. "She came to see me on Tuesday." He looked at her sharply. "What did she say?" "That I should be careful about you." The silence that followed had a particular quality, the kind that precedes either honesty or retreat, and with Mason Crawford, it was always hard to predict which way it would break. "She's not entirely wrong," he said. "About which part? Any of it." He picked up his cup again. "I don't have a clean history, Miss Scott. There are things in my past that this town remembers better than I'd like." "What kind of things?" He looked at her with those storm-gray eyes. "The kind that make a man a topic of conversation. You're already a topic of conversation." "More than you know," he said, and something in his voice closed like a door being drawn shut, not slammed, not locked, but closed deliberately, and she could either push it or leave it. She left it. For now. She rode home that afternoon with the sense that the story she was standing in had more rooms than she'd been shown, and that some of them had been locked for a long time. The second week of August arrived with a heat that turned the air visible and made tempers short as a struck match. Cole Hargis stopped coming to school. He simply didn't appear one Monday morning. His seat sat empty, while the other children shuffled through their lessons, and Tommy Briggs, who Vivian had been watching carefully for weeks, kept glancing at that empty chair with an expression she couldn't fully read. Not triumph, not exactly. Something more complicated and less comfortable than triumph. She kept him after class. "Tommy." She sat across from him at the reading table. "Where is Cole?" "Don't know, ma'am." "That's not true." He looked at his desk. He was 13, big for his age, with his father's broad shoulders already starting to come in. His pa pulled him, said he didn't need school right now. Right now being when there's trouble. He met her eyes. His pa wants him at the ranch. Vivian was quiet for a moment. "Does your father want the same from you?" Tommy's jaw shifted. "My pa says Mr. Crawford would never ask a boy to stand in a man's business." "But Garrett Hargis would." He didn't answer, which was its own answer. She let him go. She sat alone in the empty schoolroom for 10 minutes afterward, listening to the sound of the heat and the dry wind. And then she stood up, put on her hat, and went to find Mason Crawford. She didn't wait for Saturday. She found him at the creek. He was standing at the water's edge looking south, and when she rode up, he turned, and his expression did something complicated before it settled. "You heard," he said. "Cole Hargis is out of school. Garrett's moving him into whatever's coming. It's escalating." He said it flatly, like a man reading a weather report he'd been expecting. "2 of his men cut my fence last night, north pasture. 12 cattle got onto the ridge before my hands caught them." Mason. She used his first name without deciding to. It had just come out, and it hung there between them for a moment, and neither of them addressed it. "You need to get the marshal out here. I wrote 3 weeks ago." "Write again, louder." "It doesn't work that way." "Then make it work." She was off her horse now, standing in front of him, and she could see the exhaustion he was carrying. Not physical, not exactly, but the kind that comes from holding a position alone for too long. "You have rights here. Documented legal rights. Stop treating them like suggestions." He stared at her. "You think I haven't? I think you've been so careful not to start something that you haven't noticed Garrett Hargis already started it." Her voice was steady. She had learned in the last year how to be steady when it mattered most. The fence posts, the mill road, now the cattle. He's not waiting for a confrontation, Mason. He's already in one. You're just the only one who doesn't know it's begun. The silence was absolute. Then, "You're very certain of things for someone who's been here 6 weeks. I've been watching people underestimate trouble for most of my life," she said. "I know what it looks like when someone decides a situation isn't serious yet and waits too long." Something shifted in his face. Not anger, closer to recognition, the kind that doesn't always feel good. "What do you want me to do, Vivian?" Her name. He'd said her name. She registered it the same way she'd registered using his quietly without ceremony, like 2 people who had decided something without discussing it. "I want you to write to the marshal tonight. I want you to document everything, dates, damages, names. And I want you to talk to Will Chambers." He frowned. "The lawyer in Rawlins. He rode through town last week. He's still here, Margaret told me." "Chambers charges more than—" "I know." She looked at him. "I have some money set aside, from Philadelphia. I was saving it for it doesn't matter what I was saving it for." His expression did something she hadn't seen before. A kind of shutting down that was different from the closed doors she'd seen. This was something more like refusal. Hard and immediate. "No," he said. "Mason." "No." His voice was quiet, but it had iron in it. "I won't take your money. Not for this. Not for anything." "It's not charity. It's— I know what it is." He looked at her, and there was something raw in those storm-gray eyes now. Not anger, but something older and more difficult. "I know what you mean by it, and I know why you're offering, and the answer is no. I handle my own land and my own fights. Even when you're losing them." The words landed harder than she'd intended. She saw them land. She watched him absorb them, his jaw tightening, his hands going still at his sides. "Yes," he said. Even then, she wanted to push. She didn't. Some things couldn't be pushed, and she had learned to tell the difference between a wall and a door. Walls didn't have hinges, and pushing them only hurt the one doing the pushing. She rode back to town with her jaw set and her mind working. She went to find Will Chambers herself. He was at the saloon not drinking, she was relieved to see, just using the table for paperwork, and he looked up with the particular expression of a man who was not accustomed to women walking into saloons with intention. "Miss Scott," he said, because Ruth had apparently gotten to him first. "Mr. Chambers." She sat down across from him without being invited, which she was making a habit of. "I need to know about water rights law in Wyoming territory." He blinked. "That's a rather specific question." "It's a rather specific problem." She told him everything. Not Mason's personal history that wasn't hers to tell, but the creek, the agreement, the fence posts, the mill road, the cut fences. She laid it out clearly and completely the way she had once written reports for the Philadelphia Ladies' Educational Council before they asked her to stop attending. When she finished, Chambers was quiet for a moment. Crawford knows all this, he said. Crawford knows the facts. He needs to know the legal standing. He hasn't come to me himself. No. She looked at him directly. He won't. That's why I'm here. Chambers studied her. You're not his wife. No. Not his... No, she said again more firmly. I'm his neighbor, and I have an interest in this town not tearing itself apart over a creek. She paused. And I have 14 children in my schoolroom, and 2 of them are about to be drafted into a range war by their fathers, and I would very much like that not to happen. Something in Chambers' expression settled. He picked up his pen. Tell me the exact location of the mill. She did. She was back at the schoolhouse by supper time, and she sat on the front steps in the cooling evening air and thought about Mason Crawford saying no with iron in his voice. And she thought about the fact that she hadn't stopped moving anyway, and she thought that this was perhaps the most herself she had been in a very long time. Ruth Calloway found her there. I saw you come out of the saloon, Ruth said, sitting down beside her with the ease of someone who had decided to be a friend and was acting accordingly. I talked to Chambers. About Crawford. About water rights. Ruth was quiet. Then, he didn't send you. No. He doesn't know. Not yet. Ruth looked out at the evening. He's going to be furious. Probably. You're not concerned about that. Vivian looked at her. I'm concerned about a lot of things, Ruth. A man's pride is not currently at the top of my list. Ruth stared at her for a moment. Then she did something Vivian hadn't expected. She laughed. A real laugh, short and genuine, the kind that surprises itself. Lord, Miss Scott, she said, you are going to be interesting to watch. He found out on Friday. She didn't know how Chambers must have ridden out, or sent word, or someone in town had talked, but she was in the middle of correcting reading exercises when she heard the horse, and then the knock on the schoolhouse door was sharp enough to make 2 of the younger children flinch. She went to the door. Mason Crawford stood on the step, hat in hand, but not the polite version of hat in hand. The held because he needed something to hold version. A word, Miss Scott. She looked past him at the empty yard. I'm in the middle of... Please. She had not heard him say please before. It stopped her. She turned to the class and told them to continue their exercises. Stepped outside and pulled the door partly closed behind her. You went to Chambers, he said. Not an accusation. Not exactly, but close. I did. Without telling me. You'd already said no. So you just... He stopped. His jaw worked. Vivian, I told you I didn't want... You told me you didn't want my money. She kept her voice even. I didn't offer him any. I gave him information. What he does with it is his business. That's not... He exhaled. That's not the point. Then what is the point? He looked at her, and the frustration in his face was complicated, tangled up with something else, something she recognized because she had felt it herself in Philadelphia, when people had done kind things for her, without asking. And she had wanted to refuse them, purely because accepting felt like admitting she couldn't manage alone. I handle my own affairs, he said. You were losing them, she said not unkindly. Sometimes handling your own affairs means letting someone hand you a tool. You're not a tool. No, she agreed. I'm a woman who knows a lawyer and isn't afraid to use him. The silence stretched between them. A child's voice drifted through the schoolhouse door, Bessie reading aloud slowly and carefully, the way she always did, working hard at every word. Chambers says the survey line holds, Mason said finally. The mill road is mine by 3 feet. I know. He's filing an injunction. I know that too. He looked at her. How? He told me this morning. Mason stared at her for another long moment. Something moved through his face, complicated and quiet, like weather changing at a distance. You could have told me you were going to him, he said. Softer now, the iron gone from it. Would you have let me... a beat? No. Then I made the right call, He looked down at the hat in his hands. He turned it once, the brim moving through his fingers. "My wife used to do that," he said. "Just move, do the thing, not wait for permission." Vivian didn't say anything. She waited. "I wasn't ready for that again," he said, very quietly. "I'm not sure I'm ready now." It was the most honest thing he had ever said to her. She felt the weight of it, not a burden, but the weight of something real, something that cost him to say. "I'm not asking you to be ready," she said. "I'm just asking you to let me be useful." He raised his eyes to hers. For a moment, just a moment, something opened in that gray gaze. Something old and carefully kept and not entirely defended. Then Bessie's voice rose behind the door, triumphant. "I read the whole page, Miss Scott." And Mason Crawford almost smiled. It didn't quite arrive, but she saw it coming, and that was enough. "Tell Chambers to send the bill to the ranch," he said. She nodded. He put his hat on and walked back to his horse and rode east. And Vivian stood on the step for a moment before going back to her children, and she thought that sometimes the most important moments don't announce themselves. Sometimes they arrive quietly, looking like nothing at all. But they change the tilt of everything, and summer was not done with them yet. The injunction arrived on a Thursday, and by Friday morning, all of Harlan Creek knew about it. Vivian heard it first from Margaret, who appeared at the schoolhouse door before the children arrived, with the look of someone carrying news that had already gotten away from her. "Garrett Hargis came into town last night," Margaret said. "He was at the saloon until midnight. Loud." "How loud?" "Loud enough that his boy heard about it at home and came in this morning looking like he hadn't slept." Vivian thought of Cole, the empty desk, the absent Fridays. "Cole's back in school. He was outside the schoolhouse 20 minutes ago. Whether he comes in is another matter." He came in. He sat in the back row where he always sat, and he didn't speak during morning lessons, and he didn't look at Tommy Briggs, and he didn't look at Vivian. He looked at the wall behind her head, with the fixed, hollow expression of a boy carrying a man's weight and not knowing how to put it down. At noon, when the others went outside, he stayed in his seat. Vivian didn't make a production of it. She simply moved to the front row, sat down, and waited. "My pa says Crawford bought a judge," Cole said finally. "Your pa is wrong," Vivian said. "The survey law is clear. The mill road belongs to the Crawford property by legal record." "My pa says the law doesn't mean much out here." "Then your pa should be careful what he teaches you," she said, not unkindly. "Because you're going to live in this territory a long time after this creek dispute is settled." Cole's jaw tightened. He was 14, she realized, not 15 like she'd assumed. He looked older because he was trying to. "You're taking his side." "I'm not on anyone's side," she said. "I'm on the side of you being in this classroom instead of standing on a creek bank with a rifle you shouldn't be holding." Something cracked in his face, just briefly. A boy looking out from behind the soldier his father was building. "He's my pa," he said. "I can't just—" "I know," she said. "I know you can't." She let that sit for a moment. "But you can stay in school. That's something you can do." He didn't answer. But he came back after noon recess. And she counted that. The injunction didn't stop Garrett Hargis. That was the thing nobody had wanted to say out loud, but everybody had known. Legal documents needed enforcement, and enforcement needed a marshal, and the marshal was still a 3-day ride away and apparently in no hurry. What it did do was make Hargis meaner. Mason rode into town on Saturday, not to the schoolhouse, not for the regular visit, but directly to the telegraph office, and Vivian saw him from her window and was outside before he had tied his horse. What happened? He turned. His expression was controlled, but she had learned to read the edges of it. "Last night, 2 of my hands. Hurt. Pete Daly has a broken arm. The other one?" He stopped. "He's all right, but they were outnumbered and they knew it." Vivian felt cold despite the August heat. "Hargis's men did this." "Can't prove it." "Mason can't prove it," he repeated harder. "No witnesses who'll talk. No names I can put on paper." He was holding himself with the controlled tension of someone who had made a decision not to do the obvious thing, and was paying for that decision in real time. I'm wiring the governor's office. Chambers says if the marshal won't come, the governor's office can compel him. How long does that take? Don't know. She looked at him. Your men are in danger. I know that. And you're sending a telegram. What would you have me do, Vivian? His voice cracked slightly on her name, not from weakness, from pressure, the way a plank cracks when there's too much weight and no give. Ride down there with my rifle. End up in the ground and leave the ranch to no one. Is that better? She didn't answer because the answer was no, and he knew it, and she knew it, and they both knew this was not a situation that had a good option, only a least bad one. Send the telegram, she said. He went inside. She waited. When he came back out, some of the tightness had shifted in his face. Not gone, redistributed. You don't have to wait out here. I know. This isn't your... Don't, she said quietly. Don't say it isn't my problem. We're past that. He looked at her for a long moment in the August sun. When did we get past that? Sometime between the needle and the lawyer, she said. And something very small, very guarded, but undeniably present moved in his eyes. Not a smile. Deeper than a smile. The kind of thing that lives behind smiles and only comes out when the performance is too tiring to maintain. Come to the ranch this afternoon, he said. I need to tell you something. She went. The something he needed to tell her was this before he married Clara. Before the ranch, before Wyoming. Mason Crawford had been a man with a different name in a different state, and the reason he kept to himself in Harlan Creek was not grief alone. He told her on the porch in the long afternoon heat, in the same flat, factual way he told everything, and she sat and listened without interrupting, and this is what she heard. He had grown up in Missouri. His father ran a supply operation for the railroads, not entirely legitimately, not criminal exactly, but close enough to criminal that the lines blurred in bad years. When Mason was 22, his father's partner had accused him of theft. Mason had not committed the theft. The partner had committed the theft and named Mason to redirect suspicion. There had been a hearing, not a proper trial, a hearing the kind that existed before proper process arrived, and Mason had lost, and the choice had been jail or gone, and he had chosen gone. He had come west. He had built the ranch from nothing. He had married Clara, who had known all of it and loved him anyway, and when she died, he had buried the last person on earth who knew his full name and his full history and was still present by choice. The name on the deed is Crawford, he said. My mother's family name. Legal now, I had it changed through the territory court 8 years ago. Everything I built is clean. Vivian was quiet. But Hargis knows, Mason said. Somebody told him. I don't know who, but he's been dropping it in the saloon in conversations, nothing direct enough to act on, just enough to make people uncertain about me. That's why the town was cautious. That's part of why. He looked at his hands. I should have told you before you went to Chambers, before you put your name near mine in a legal matter. It wouldn't have changed anything, she said. He looked up. Vivian, an accusation 30 years ago in Missouri changes nothing about who you are or what your rights are here. Her voice was steady. I grew up in a world where people use other people's pasts to control their presents. I know what that looks like, and I know what it's worth. She met his gaze directly. It's worth nothing to me. The silence was absolute. You don't know the details, he said. You don't know. You told me a man lied about you, and you lost, and you left, and you built something real. She looked at him. Mason. I was publicly called unstable by a man I trusted in front of everyone I knew while I was sitting right there. I left and I built something real. A beat. I think I know the shape of your story. Something broke open in his face. Not dramatically, not the way it happens in stories where people weep and speeches are made. Quietly. The way ice breaks at the end of winter, first a sound, then a shift. Then something that was frozen begins slowly to move. Clara would have liked you, he said. His voice was rough with it. Tell me about her, Vivian said, and he did. For the first time since she had known him, he talked about Clara without closing up. At the edges, talked about how she had laughed, how she had argued, how she had ridden faster than anyone on the ranch and refused to apologize for it, how she had died in the second winter, a fever that came fast, and didn't give any of them time to prepare. How he had sat by her for 2 days and nights and held her hand, and how his hands had not felt entirely steady since. Vivian listened to all of it. She didn't offer comfort of the arranged kind. No, I'm so sorry. Deployed like furniture to fill a room. She just listened, which was what he needed, and she understood that listening was its own form of bravery. When he finished, the sun was low and orange. I should get back before dark, she said. I'll ride with you to the creek track. You don't? I know. He was already standing reaching for his hat. I know I don't have to. They rode side by side without much talking, and the quiet between them was different from the quiet of the first weeks, not the quiet of two people being careful, but the quiet of two people who had said the real things and were resting in the aftermath. At the fork where the creek track split toward town, he stopped. Vivian. She stopped too. What Hargis knows about my past, he's going to use it. Maybe publicly. Maybe soon. He looked at her straight. When that happens, your association with me will cost you. The school board could let them, she said. It's your position, your livelihood. It's my choice, she said. My choice, Mason. Not yours to make for me. He held her gaze. You are the most stubborn woman I've ever met. Second most, she said. You told me Clara rode faster than anyone. He stared at her. Then, the thing that had been building behind his eyes for weeks of Saturday porches and tin cups, and her name in his mouth and his hand steady enough to hand her coffee, that thing arrived. He didn't say it. He didn't need to. She rode back to town. She was halfway there when she heard the shot, not close, distant from the south, from the direction of the creek. One shot, then silence, then two more in fast succession. She pulled her horse up hard and stood in the track, listening, her heart slamming against her ribs, and the silence after the third shot was the worst kind of silence, the kind that doesn't tell you anything. She turned toward town instead of back toward the ranch. She rode fast and she went directly to the Calloway house and knocked hard. Ruth answered in 2 seconds, which meant she'd heard it too. The creek, Vivian said. I know. We need to get someone out there. Jim Calloway is already saddling. Ruth's face was tight. Get inside. I'm not... Vivian. Ruth grabbed her arm. Get inside. There is nothing you can do on that creek right now that isn't getting in the way of something dangerous, and you know it. She knew it. She went inside. She sat at Ruth's kitchen table, and she did not pray exactly. She had not been on reliable terms with prayer since Philadelphia. But she did something in the vicinity of it, directed at nothing in particular, which was, let him be all right. Let him be standing. Let his hands be steady. Jim Calloway came back in 40 minutes. He came through the door with mud on his boots, and his face arranged in the deliberate calm of a man delivering information. He doesn't want to alarm anyone, with which told Vivian immediately that there was something to be alarmed about. Crawford's man, the young one, Danny Walsh, he's been shot. Shoulder. He's alive. Vivian exhaled. Crawford? He's fine. He was there. Drew Hargis's men off Walsh got him back to the ranch. How many of Hargis's men? 4. They were on Crawford's side of the creek, which they have no right to be on, and Danny Walsh was telling them so, and things escalated. Jim's jaw was hard. Crawford rode in, and it stopped. For now. For now, Vivian repeated. Jim looked at her. Miss Scott, I want to be plain with you. This is the kind of thing that gets worse before it stops. The injunction slowed Hargis down for about 4 days. A shot man slows him down for maybe 2. He set his hat on the table. We need that marshal here. I know. I've sent my own wire tonight, but if you have any influence with Crawford, any at all, tell him not to go back to that creek alone. Tell him whatever pride costs him here, it costs less than his life. She rode to the ranch at dawn. She didn't care what the town would say. She didn't care what Doris Pratt would make of a schoolteacher arriving at a rancher's property at first light. She cared about one thing: whether Mason Crawford was going to be alive long enough for whatever was building between them to become something she had a name for. He was awake. He was at the table with coffee and paper, writing, she realized as she came to the door. Writing the incident report Chambers had told him to document. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway. He took in the fact that she was there at dawn without invitation, and he didn't say a word about it. "Danny," she said, "Doc Marsh got the bullet out last night. He'll keep the arm." "And you—" "I'm writing." She came in, sat down, poured herself coffee from the pot on the stove without asking. He watched her do it. "4 men on your property," she said. "Armed?" "Yes." "They shot your man?" "Yes." "And you drew them off him?" He didn't answer, which told her exactly what the drawing off had looked like and why he wasn't going to describe it. "Mason," she set her cup down, "I need you to hear me." "I'm listening. This ends one of 2 ways. The marshal comes and the law holds, or someone dies and the law comes too late." She looked at him. "I need you to make sure the second thing isn't you." He was quiet for a moment. "You sound like you have a stake in that outcome." "I do." The words sat between them. Simple. Undecorated. The truest thing she had said since arriving in Wyoming, and they both knew it. He looked at her across the table. The morning light was coming through the window, and his face was open in a way she'd only seen it once before, the afternoon he'd talked about Clara. Unguarded. Present. "Vivian," he said. And then he stopped, because some things don't fit into the words available, and both of them were well acquainted with that problem. "I know," she said. Outside, the summer heat was already building. Somewhere on the South Range, Garrett Hargis was making a decision. Somewhere 3 days ride away, a marshal was reading a wire, or wasn't. And in the ranch kitchen, 2 people who had arrived at this table by way of loss and stubbornness, and an accidentally repaired shirt, held their coffee cups, and held the moment, and held for a little while longer the space before everything broke open. But the creek was still there, and the water rights were still disputed, and Danny Walsh had a hole in his shoulder, and Summer was running out of patience. The marshal arrived on a Tuesday. Nobody had expected Tuesday. The wire had gone unanswered for so long that Vivian had stopped checking with the telegraph office on her way to school, and Mason had stopped mentioning it with the deliberate absence of a man who has trained himself not to want things he can't control. So when Ruth Calloway appeared in the schoolhouse doorway at 10:30, with her eyes wide and her composure visibly rattled, Vivian set down her chalk and knew before Ruth said a word. "He's here," Ruth said. "The Marshal Cord Avery, and he didn't come alone. He had brought 2 deputies, which either meant the governor's office had taken the situation seriously, or that Cord Avery had read the wires and made his own assessment. He was a compact man in his 50s, unhurried in the way of someone who had learned that urgency was mostly wasted energy, and he set himself up at the saloon table that Will Chambers had previously occupied and started asking questions in a tone that made it clear he expected answers. Vivian heard all of this from Margaret at noon, because by noon, the whole town had processed through the saloon in one capacity or another, and Margaret had collected the relevant information with the efficiency of a woman who understood that knowledge was currency. "He's already spoken to Chambers," Margaret said, "and to Jim Calloway, and to 3 of Crawford's hands." "Has he spoken to Crawford?" "He's riding out to the ranch this afternoon." Vivian went back to her classroom. She taught the afternoon lessons with her full attention and only part of her mind, which was the best she could manage, and when the children filed out at 4 o'clock, Cole Hargis was the last one through the door. He stopped on the step. "The marshal's here," he said, not a question. "Yes." "My pa's going to—" He stopped, swallowed. "He's going to say things about Crawford, old things." Vivian looked at him. "Cole, whatever your father says or doesn't say, it doesn't change the survey line. It doesn't change the law." "I know that." His voice cracked slightly. 14 years old, trying so hard to sound certain. I don't want anyone else to get shot." "Neither do I," she said. "Neither does Mason Crawford." He nodded once stiffly, the way boys nod when they're holding something together by will alone. Then he walked away, and she watched him go, and she thought about fathers and sons, and the weight of loyalties that nobody chooses. Mason came to the schoolhouse that evening. He knocked this time, which told her the visit was different from the morning at his ranch, more considered, more deliberate. She opened the door, and he was standing there with his hat in his hands again, but different from the last time. Not the held because he needed something to hold version. The held because he was being careful version. "Avery came," he said. "I heard. He's thorough. He read everything Chambers is filing, the incident reports, the survey records." He paused. "He wants a meeting tomorrow morning. Hargis and me. His deputies present. Chambers present." "That's good," Vivian said. "It might be." He looked at her. "Avery also asked me about Missouri." The air between them changed. "What did you tell him?" "Everything." His voice was even, but she could hear what that had cost him. "All of it. 30 years ago or not, I'm not starting a legal process with a lie, and Hargis would have told his version anyway." A beat. Avery listened. He didn't react the way I expected. "What did you expect?" "More." He turned his hat in his hands. "He just said, and I'm giving you his exact words, half the men who built this territory have something in their past they're not proud of. What matters is what you built after." Vivian was quiet for a moment. "He's right. Maybe." He looked up at her. "Hargis is going to use it tomorrow. In the meeting. He'll try to make the whole water dispute about my character instead of the law, and some of it might stick." "Let it." "Vivian, let it stick to whoever it sticks to," she said firmly. "The survey line doesn't change because of Missouri. The mill road doesn't move. Chambers's filing doesn't disappear." She held his gaze. "Character attacks are what people use when the facts aren't on their side. If Hargis is using them, it means the facts aren't on his side. That's good news." He stared at her. "You are deeply inconvenient," he said. "So I've been told." "I mean it as a compliment." "I know," she said. "So did most of the people who said it." He almost smiled. The almost smile she had learned to watch for the one that didn't quite make it to his face but rearranged the air around it. "I wanted to ask you something," he said. "Before tomorrow." "Ask." He took a breath. "Will you come to the meeting? Not officially. Just be there." She understood exactly what he was asking and what it cost him to ask it. Mason Crawford, who handled his own affairs and his own fights, was asking her to be in the room. "Yes," she said. No hesitation. The meeting the next morning was in the saloon, which was the largest room Harlan Creek had available, and by 8 o'clock, half the town had found reasons to be in the immediate vicinity. Ruth Calloway was outside the door with a cup of coffee she wasn't drinking. Jim Calloway was leaning on the post across the street. Margaret Hale had developed a sudden interest in the merchandise displayed in the general store window directly opposite. Inside, Mason sat on one side of the table with Chambers beside him. Garrett Hargis sat across from them, two of his men standing behind him, and the sight of him, big, florid, confident in the way of men who have never been seriously checked, made Vivian's jaw tighten from where she stood near the wall. Marshal Avery was at the head of the table. He looked at Vivian when she came in, assessed her in one quick glance, and said nothing. His deputies were at the door. Hargis noticed her. "This is Schoolteacher's meeting now, Marshal." "Miss Scott is present as an observer," Avery said without looking up from his papers. "She stays." Hargis settled back with the elaborate ease of a man making it clear he isn't threatened. The meeting began. Avery was methodical. He laid out the survey records, the legal agreement. Chambers is filing the documented incidents, the fence posts, the mill road blockade, the cut fences. Danny Walsh's shoulder. He stated each fact, without inflection, like a man building a wall, one brick at a time, and he did not hurry. Hargis let him finish. Then he said, "Before we go further, Marshal, I think there's something about Crawford's history you ought to hear." Avery looked at him. "Crawford's history in Missouri." Hargis blinked. "You know about it." "I know everything you were about to tell me," Avery said. "I know it." I've assessed it, and it's not relevant to a water rights dispute in Wyoming territory in 1876. Move on. The silence that followed lasted approximately 4 seconds. They were among the most satisfying 4 seconds Vivian had ever witnessed. Hargis' face went through several colors. The man was accused of theft, accused and not convicted in a proceeding that predates proper territorial law by 2 decades, Avery said. Move on, Mr. Hargis, or I'll assume you don't have anything relevant to say about the water dispute, and we'll proceed without your input. Vivian did not look at Mason. She looked at her hands. But she felt him the shift in his posture beside her, something releasing that had been held a very long time. What happened next was this: Hargis tried 4 more arguments, and Chambers dismantled each one with the quiet precision of a man who had spent 3 weeks preparing for exactly this. The survey line was the survey line. The mill road access was documented. The incidents were documented. The presence of Hargis's armed men on Crawford's property was a matter of sworn testimony from 3 witnesses. By the end of the hour, Avery had issued a formal cease order against Hargis's interference with Crawford property. He had assigned a deputy to remain in Harlan Creek for 30 days, and he had made it quietly but unmistakably clear that the next incident would result in Garrett Hargis spending time in a territorial jail. Hargis stood up from the table with the stiff fury of a man who had lost and knew it, and had decided to make that loss look like a strategic withdrawal. He looked at Mason. This isn't finished. Seems pretty finished to me, Mason said. His voice was level, no triumph in it, just a fact stated plainly. Hargis walked out. His men followed. The door didn't slam. He was too controlled for that, but it closed hard enough that everybody felt it. Chambers exhaled. That went better than I expected. Better than I expected, too, Avery said, rolling up his papers. He looked at Vivian. You didn't say a word the whole time. You didn't need me to, she said. He looked at her for a moment with an expression that might have been approval. Then he looked at Mason. Get your fences mended. Document anything that happens in the next 30 days, anything at all. He picked up his hat. Crawford. Marshall. Good piece of land you've built here. Avery said it without ceremony as a simple observation and walked out. Mason stood very still. Then he looked at Vivian. She looked back at him. Don't say it, he said. I wasn't going to say anything. You were going to say you told me. I was going to say you did well, she said. And I was going to say I'm glad it's over. It's not over, he said. Hargis doesn't stop being Hargis. He just stops having legal cover. That's enough for now, she said. Sometimes enough for now is all there is. Chambers was gathering his papers and trying with great tactfulness to appear as if he were not in the middle of a private moment. He failed and left, and then it was just Mason and Vivian in the empty saloon with the morning light coming through the door. Cole Hargis was absent today, she said. I know. He'll be back tomorrow. How do you know? Because he told me he didn't want anyone else to get shot, she said. That boy is going to be all right, Mason. He just needs time. He looked at her. You know that from one conversation. I know it from 14-year-olds, she said. I've been studying them for a while now. He shook his head slightly. Then, come to the ranch for supper, tonight. It was different from the coffee invitations. The coffee had been mornings practical, something that could be explained as neighborly. Supper was something else. She heard the difference, and she knew he heard it too. All right, she said. She was there at 6. He had cooked not elaborately just beef and biscuits and the tail end of the summer peaches, and they ate at the kitchen table and talked with the ease of people who had already said the hard things and were now in the lighter territory on the other side. He told her about his sister in Santa Fe. Her name was Adeline. She was 3 years younger. She ran a seamstress shop and had 2 children and wrote him letters full of news and unsolicited advice that he read every time within an hour of receiving them and complained about to no one. She writes me too, Vivian said. Mason stopped. What? She wrote me 2 weeks ago. Vivian looked at her plate. She'd heard there was a new schoolteacher. She wanted to know she wanted to know how things were. Adeline wrote you. She's very direct. What did she say? His voice was careful. She said that her brother was the best man she knew and the worst at letting people help him, and that if I was the kind of woman who could tolerate that I should stay in Wyoming. Vivian looked up. I wrote back and told her I was not going anywhere. He stared at her for a long time. You didn't tell me. You didn't tell me about Missouri for 3 weeks, she said pleasantly. He stopped. That's not the same. It's a little the same. He sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling briefly, in the way of a man arriving at an emotion he hadn't budgeted for. Adeline is going to be insufferable about this. She already is, Vivian said. She's delightful. She's a menace, he said, but there was warmth in it. The complicated warmth of siblings, all edges, and love, with nothing in between. After supper, they sat on the porch in the cooling night, and he was quiet for a long time, and she let him be quiet, and the stars came out in the gradual way. Wyoming stars did not all at once, but one by one, as if the sky were making up its mind. There's something I need to say, he said. All right, I've been careful, since Clara. He looked out at the dark land. Not careful like cautious, careful like a man who knows what it costs to open something up and doesn't want to do it again, and keeps making exceptions to that position and doesn't quite know how to stop. Vivian waited. You are a significant exception, he said. She looked at him. His profile in the dark, the jaw that carried things, the eyes that had more in them than he ever said. I know, she said softly. I don't know what to do about it yet, he said. I want to be honest with you. I don't know yet what I have to offer that's worth what you'd be taking on. Mason. She turned toward him. You built a ranch from nothing after losing everything. You protected your men at risk to yourself. You stayed your hand when a lesser man would have burned everything down. She paused. I know what you have to offer. And I know what I'm taking on, she continued. Water disputes and a complicated history, and a man who hands over needles with shaking hands and doesn't know how to ask for coffee. I've considered it thoroughly. She held his gaze. I'm not in Wyoming by accident. The silence after that was different from every silence that had come before it. Not loaded. Not careful. Settled. He reached over and took her hand. Just that. Just the simple, unhurried gesture of a man who had made a decision and was acting on it without fanfare. His hand was warm and no longer shaking. I need more time, he said. Not because I'm uncertain, but because I want to do this right. I want you to have something solid, not something rushed. I've waited for solid before, she said. I don't need fast. I need true. Then you have it, he said. Whatever true I've got left in me, you have it. They sat that way for a while, his hand over hers, the stars finishing their arrangement above Wyoming. It was Ruth Calloway who found her the next morning. Vivian was opening the schoolhouse when Ruth came up the road with the particular speed of someone who has news that can't wait and isn't sure how to start. Hargis, Ruth said. Vivian's hand stopped on the door latch. What? He was at the saloon last night, after the meeting. Ruth caught her breath. He was talking. About you. About me specifically. About you and Crawford. Ruth's voice was tight. He told anyone who would listen that you've been riding to the ranch unchaperoned since August, that you spent the night there. I have never spent the night there. I know that, Ruth said. But he said it, and Doris Pratt was in the room, and by this morning, 3 school board members have been asked whether a teacher of questionable character ought to be my character, Vivian said. Yes. She stood with her hand on the door latch and felt the particular fury of a woman who has survived this exact thing before in a different city with a different man pulling the strings. The same move, the same mechanics. When the facts fail, attack the woman adjacent to them. Who are the 3 board members? Alderman Price Robert Hale, Margaret's husband. Yes, but Margaret will handle him and Foster Webb. I don't know Webb. He owns the feed store. He's cautious, but he's fair. Ruth looked at her. Vivian, what do you want to do? She thought about Philadelphia. She thought about the dinner party and the soup and the carefully arranged faces and the silence that had swallowed her whole. She thought about Wyoming, about 14 children in a classroom, about Bessie's dandelions, about Cole Hargis deciding not to stand on a creek bank with a rifle. She thought about Mason's hand over hers, warm and steady. I want to open this school, she said, and teach my class. And then I want to speak to Foster Webb. Just Webb. Start with the one who's fair, she said. The others follow. She opened the door. The children were coming up the road. And in the back of the small group, walking a little apart from the others, with the careful posture of someone who had made a decision overnight, Cole Hargis, back in school. She looked at him. He looked at her. Something passed between them, teacher and student, both navigating fathers who had decided their futures for them, both showing up anyway. Mr. Hargis, she said. Good morning. Morning, ma'am, he said, and walked to his seat. She thought, Garrett Hargis, you have no idea what you're dealing with. She picked up her chalk. Foster Webb was not what Vivian expected. She had prepared for cautious. She had prepared for a man who weighed his words the way merchants weigh grain carefully, with one eye on the cost. What she had not prepared for was a man who opened the door of the feed store, looked at her and said, I was wondering when you'd come. She stopped. You were expecting me. Since this morning. He held the door wider. Come in. I've already heard 2 versions of what Hargis said last night. I expect yours is the one worth listening to. She told him plainly. No softening, no Philadelphia-style management of information. She told him about the Saturday coffee visits, about Chambers, and the legal filing, about Danny Walsh, and the Creek, and the Marshals meeting. She told him she had never spent the night at the Crawford ranch, and that Garrett Hargis was a man who had lost a legal dispute and was now attempting to win through reputation what he could not win through law. Webb listened with his hands folded on the counter. When she finished, he said, Do you intend to continue your association with Crawford? Yes. As what exactly? She looked at him steadily. As whatever it becomes, honestly and openly. He studied her. That's a forthright answer. I find forthright saves time. A pause. Then something in Webb's face settled the deliberate choosing of a position. Miss Scott, I have 2 daughters in your classroom. The older one came home last week and told her mother that she wanted to be a teacher because of you. He picked up a pencil and tapped it once on the counter. I'll speak to Price. I can't speak for him, but I'll speak to him. That's all I'm asking. Hargis will push harder before he stops. I know, she said. He can push. Webb almost smiled. Good day, Miss Scott. She walked back to the schoolhouse in the afternoon heat with her spine straight and her mind clear, and she thought that Wyoming was in its rough and unvarnished way, more honest than any city she had ever lived in. In Philadelphia, this fight would have been conducted through whispers and invitations rescinded, and doors quietly closed. Here people said it to your face and you said it back, and then everyone knew where they stood. She found she preferred it. What she did not expect, what none of them had accounted for, was Cole Hargis. He stayed after class again that Friday. Not with the hollow soldier's expression of 2 weeks ago, but with the look of someone who has been turning something over in his mind and finally needs to put it down. Miss Scott, he said, my pa knows I've been coming back to school. I assumed he did. He hasn't stopped me. Cole's jaw worked. I think he's tired. I think all of it, the marshal, the cease order. I think he knows he went too far. Vivian was very careful. What makes you say that? He hasn't talked about Crawford in 4 days, Cole said. For my pa, that's something. She nodded slowly. How are you, Cole? He blinked like the question had surprised him. Fine. That's not what I asked. He looked at his desk. I don't want to be what he is, he said, very quietly. I don't want to. I want to run cattle someday, have land, but I don't want to do it the way he does. Then don't, she said simply. You're 14. You have time to decide what kind of man you're building. He looked up at her. Something in his face, young and old at the same time, the way faces get when life has pushed too much through them too fast. Do you think, Mr. Crawford? He stopped. What? Do you think he'd ever— I know my pa and him have— Another stop. Never mind. You want to know if he'd hold your father against you? Cole didn't answer. He didn't have to. No, she said. He wouldn't. She said it with full confidence because she knew it was true. Mason Crawford is a man who understands the difference between a father's choices and a son's. Cole nodded, stood up, picked up his books with the air of someone who had set something down and felt lighter for it. See you Monday, Miss Scott? See you Monday, Cole. She told Mason that evening. She had taken to stopping at the ranch on Fridays, now the Saturday coffee visits having naturally expanded without discussion the way good things do when nobody panics and tries to manage them. She found him mending tack in the barn, and she leaned against the doorframe and told him about Cole, and she watched his face while she talked. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then, send him to me in the spring. She straightened. What? If he wants to learn ranching, real ranching, not what his father's been doing, send him to me in the spring. I'll put him to work. She looked at him. Mason, his name is Hargis. I know whose name it is. He looked up from the harness in his hands. A boy who chooses different from his father deserves somebody to choose different back. She held his gaze for a long moment. You know the town will talk. The town talks about everything, he said. I've stopped designing my life around it. She thought, there it is. The man inside the careful distance. The one who had been in there all along, waiting for enough safety to act. When did that happen? She asked. He looked at her. Sometime between the needle and the lawyer, he said. He said it deliberately, using her words back at her, and the effect it had on her, the warmth that moved through her chest, unreasonable and undeniable, was not something she tried to manage or explain. Adeline is coming, he said, returning to the harness. Vivian blinked. When? October, she wrote last week. He didn't look up, but she could hear the careful casualness he was deploying. She wants to meet you. I thought she might, Vivian said. She's a menace, Vivian finished. I remember. The sound he made was the closest thing to a full laugh she had ever gotten from him. Not quite there, almost. The cousin of a laugh arriving breathless and surprised. And she counted it the way she counted all his almost smiles as things being built piece by piece out of what had been broken. It was the last week of August when Garrett Hargis came to the schoolhouse. She was alone after hours when she heard the boots on the step. Heavy, deliberate. She knew before she turned around. He filled the doorway. Bigger than he looked from a distance, with the kind of size that has been used as an argument for most of a man's life. He looked around the classroom with an expression of assessment as if checking the value of property. Miss Scott, Mr. Hargis. She didn't move from where she stood at the board. School is over for the day. If you're here about Cole. I'm not here about Cole. He stepped inside, which she had not invited him to do. I'm here about you and Crawford. She set down her chalk. Then you're here about something that isn't your business. It becomes my business when the woman sleeping with a man I'm in a legal dispute with is also teaching my son. I am not sleeping with anyone, she said. Her voice was level. She had learned level from necessity, the same necessity that had taught her how to sit at a dinner table while a man dismantled her reputation over soup and hold herself together without cracking. And I'd be careful about repeating that particular claim, Mr. Hargis. You've already had one legal problem this summer. Slander is a second one you don't need. His jaw tightened. You're not from here. You don't know how this works. I know exactly how this works, she said. A man loses a legitimate dispute and decides the woman nearby is a softer target than the man he can't beat. I've seen it before. She looked at him directly. It didn't work in Philadelphia. It won't work here. Something moved in Hargis's face. Not shame. Men like Hargis didn't shame easily, but recalculation. He was reassessing what he was standing in front of. Crawford's past has been reviewed by a territorial marshal and deemed irrelevant, she said. Is there anything else? The silence stretched. He was waiting for her to flinch. She had used up all her flinching in Pennsylvania. You're making a mistake, he said finally. I've made mistakes, she said. Choosing Mason Crawford is not one of them. It was the first time she had said it that way, out loud, to someone other than herself. She heard it as she said it, and she meant every word. Hargis looked at her for one more long moment. Then he turned and walked out, and his boots on the step were heavier going out than they had been coming in, which told her something about the weight a man carries when a fight hasn't gone the way he planned. She stood in the empty schoolroom for a full minute after he left. Then she sat down in the nearest child's chair, far too small for her, her knees awkward and high, and she pressed her palms flat on the desk and breathed. Then she stood up, straightened her skirt, and went to tell Mason. He was at the fence line. He saw her coming from a distance, and he read her face before she reached him. What happened? Not a question, she told him. Word for word, which was how she remembered things that mattered. She watched his face while she talked, the jaw going hard, the eyes going still, the particular stillness of a man holding himself back from a response he's decided not to have. When she finished, he said, He came to the schoolhouse. Yes. While you were alone. Yes. Vivian. I handled it, she said. I know you handled it. His voice was rough. That's not the point. What's the point? He looked at her. He knows what you are to me. He went there because of that. A beat. Which means you're not just an observer in this anymore. You're a target. She held his gaze. I've been a target before. Not by a man like Hargis. Mason. She stepped closer. I told him choosing you was not a mistake. And I meant it. So if being in your life means being a target for men who can't beat you any other way. She spread her hands. Then I've been a target for cheaper reasons. He stared at her. Something moved through his face that she didn't have a word for. Not the almost smile, not the opening she'd seen on the porch, but something deeper and more decided. I'm going to see Avery's deputy, he said. Tonight. Good. And then I'm coming back. I'll be here. He was. 2 hours later, he knocked on the schoolhouse door, and she opened it, and he stood on the step, not with his hat in his hands this time. Hat on. Standing straight. The look of a man who has made a decision and arrived at it. Avery's deputy is aware, he said. He's going to speak to Hargis formally tomorrow. Good. And I have something to say to you. He looked at her. I've been telling myself I need more time. That I want to do this right. That I want you to have something solid. He paused. But I've been using those words to keep from saying the thing I should have said 3 weeks ago. She waited. I love you, he said. I have loved you since you slid down a hill. You had no business sliding down, and handed me a needle and asked questions. You had no business asking, and didn't stop moving after I said no 3 times. His voice was steady. I love you, and I don't want to wait for October, or next spring, or some properly arranged moment. I want to know if you'll have me. The evening was warm, and the stars were starting. Somewhere on the South Range, a coyote called and went quiet. The schoolhouse behind her smelled of chalk and peach preserves and the accumulated lessons of a summer's worth of children. Vivian Scott, who had sat at a dinner table in Philadelphia and not cracked, who had ridden a stagecoach to the end of the line and not turned back, who had slid down a hill and taken a needle from shaking hands, and refused to be managed or silenced or redirected by anyone who had tried, looked at Mason Crawford and felt something she had stopped expecting. Not the restless searching feeling, not the waiting, not the careful management of hope. Arrival. Yes, she said. I'll have you. All of you, the history and the ranch, and the shaking hands, and the almost smiles, and the sister who is a menace. He exhaled one long, quiet breath, like something that had been held for 3 years finally released. Then he did what she had seen coming since a July afternoon on a fence post. He stepped forward, and he took her face in both his hands, those big, calloused, finely steady hands, and he kissed her the way a man kisses someone he plans to keep. The deputy spoke to Hargis the next morning. The formal warning was delivered, documented, and filed. Garrett Hargis did not come to the schoolhouse again. He did not spread further rumors. He retreated into his ranch with the sullen quiet of a man who has run out of moves, and Harlan Creek settled back into the particular rhythm of a small town in late summer, tired and warm and tending its own. Cole Hargis turned in every assignment in September. Danny Walsh healed clean and came back to work, and took to tipping his hat at Vivian with an enthusiasm that she suspected had less to do with manners and more to do with gratitude for being alive to tip it. Adeline Crawford arrived in October on a Tuesday 3 days earlier than expected, with 2 bags and an opinion about everything, and she took one look at Vivian and said, "Good, you're exactly what I hoped." "You haven't spoken to me for 5 minutes, Vivian said. "I don't need 5 minutes, Adeline said. "I've been reading your letters for 2 months. She looked at her brother. "You're going to marry this woman, Mason." "Adeline, before the snow comes, would be my recommendation." "She's been here 4 minutes, Mason said to no one in particular. 3, Vivian said, and she was laughing genuinely, fully the kind of laugh that had been dormant in her for a long time and was now returning as if it had only been waiting for the right address. And Mason was looking at his sister with the exasperation of a man who knows he has lost and has decided to be grateful for it. And Adeline was already asking Ruth Calloway where the best fabric in town could be had. The wedding was in November. Not elaborate, no Philadelphia ceremony with engraved invitations and strategic seating charts. The church that leaned slightly left was straightened enough for the occasion, and the whole town came because the whole town had been watching this particular story all summer and had earned the ending. Margaret Hale cried. Jim Calloway shook Mason's hand for a long time without speaking. Ruth Calloway did not cry, but her eyes were bright in a way she would have denied if questioned. Bessie brought flowers. They were not wilted. Vivian stood at the front of that imperfect leaning church in a dress that Adeline had made with 3 weeks of furious and joyful effort, and she looked at Mason Crawford, at the man who had sat on a fence post with shaking hands on the worst day of his calendar, who had given her a needle before he gave her his name, who had built something real out of loss and stayed the course, when lesser men would have burned it all down, and she thought of every door she had ever walked through to get to this one. All of it. The dinner table, the soup, the silence, the stagecoach, the hill, she had slid down undignified and arrived at the bottom of and kept going. All of it had been the price of admission. Worth it, she thought, every bit. Mason took her hands at the altar, both of them holding them the way you hold things you are not going to let go of, and his hands were warm and certain, and they did not shake. "I told you," he said, too quiet for the congregation, just for her. "Told me what?" "That I'd do this right." She looked at him. "You did," she said. "You absolutely did." The minister spoke the words. The church said amen. Outside Wyoming stretched wide and permanent in the November cold, and the Crawford Ranch sat solid on its surveyed land, with its water access intact and its fences mended, and its kitchen table set for 2. Vivian Scott had come to the end of the line looking for a new beginning. She found it exactly where she'd put the first stitch in a man's shaking hands on a July afternoon in a hollow no one else had any reason to visit, and she had not once turned back.